This is Annabelle Gauberti and you are listening to Lawfully Creative, my chance to talk with professionals in the creative industries to hear their stories, what inspires their creation, what decisions change their careers, what relationships influence their work. For this first podcast of Creative, I interview Richard Kirstein, who is the founding partner of a music procurement company, Resilient Music. I met Richard quite a few years ago now, probably 3 or 4 years ago, at our private members club, the Hospital Club in London, at a do. And when I launched Creative, my law firm based out of London and Paris, focusing on advising the creative industries, I had the pleasure of collaborating with Richard on several projects, work projects, and I thought that he would be a great guest for my first podcast, so here goes. Would you say, Richard, that Resilient Music is a music supervising company, or is there a particularity to the music procurement status that you give to your company?
Okay, well, I normally think of music supervision as perhaps more of the creative end of the business. So companies that find tracks for commercials or find tracks for films or TV. Traditionally, that's how I think supervision is thought of. What Resilient does is purely rights clearance, rights brokering, which is a sort of procurement and business affairs task. So I would describe Resilient as a music rights procurement consultancy.
I understand. So what you are saying is that you are not doing the curation on behalf of a brand, the choice relating to the songs that they want to have in their different ads or video content. You are really focusing on the business side.
Correct, yes. I mean, in a few cases, brands or agencies will ask us to help them find tracks or even find artists, and for those projects I'll bring in people to help us do that. But for the most part, the clients know what they want creatively, and our job is to go and buy it.
Ah, okay. Does this happen often, that they know exactly what they want?
Most of the time, yes.
Okay.
Because the clients that we work with, if they work with an agency, often the agency is the one suggesting the tracks.
Okay.
Sometimes clients have in-house resource to kind of suggest tracks as well. But if for whatever reason those tracks can't be cleared, then often I will bring someone in to find some alternatives.
Right.
If the track that they want is either not clearable or too expensive.
So when you say you bring someone in, would it be as a music supervisor? Or?
Yes. So
okay.
I have kind of external creative music strategist partners who I will bring in on a project basis to work with.
So if you are focusing mainly on the business side of things, I suppose that you must have some in-house legal capabilities at Resilient Music to do the negotiation of a contract, because it's a lot of business and legal, like commercial and legal negotiation that you are doing on a day-to-day basis.
Yes, I mean there's kind of two parts. There's the front-end negotiation of commercial terms and the back-end negotiation of the long-form licenses. Within my team I've got one US attorney who's happens to be based in the UK, a couple of paralegals, one who's based here, one who's based in New York. I then will do some of the front-end commercial negotiation depending on what the project is. It's very rare that I'll handle the negotiation of the long-form license just because the other members of my team are much better at it than I am. They're certainly far more knowledgeable about the law than I am, but that balance seems to work quite well.
Oh, wonderful. So are you saying that you focus your efforts on generating the business and getting the clients?
Yeah, if I'm doing my job properly, I should be focused on winning new business, managing the client relationships, overseeing the project work that my team does, but much more focused on working on the business rather than working in it. As any business owner should be. That's
a nice position to be in.
Well,
the other side view.
It doesn't always work out that way.
We need to do a little bit of this and a little bit of that to make it perfect. Resilient music.
It doesn't always work that way, but the most important thing is going out and generating new business, because without that you don't have a business.
Yes, I agree with you totally. So just thought so that our listeners are really completely 100% clear on what you do. Firstly, I wanted to point out the fact that you've written an extremely insightful book, Music Rights Without Fights, which has got excellent reviews on Amazon, which I am currently reading, and I find it fascinating, especially because you put a lot of little stories and anecdotes, so that makes the whole thing even more vivid. I wanted to ask you whether it's possible for you to describe us one of the sing deals that you did for Hunter, where you were actually, I understand, brokered that deal with possibly the management, publisher and label of the delightful Courtney Barnett, for her track Nobody Really Cares If You Don't Go to a Party. I discovered Courtney Barnett, by the way, earlier this year through an artist who is quite keen on Courtney Barnett's work, and this artist I was speaking to described her as being the only female artist out there who works in the rock niche. There aren't many female rock acts, and Courtney Barnett is definitely an excellent representation of that. So she came on my radar earlier this year, and I was delighted yesterday when I was browsing on your website, resilientmusic.com, that you did a deal with Courtney Barnett, management, and Hunter. So is that something you can talk about, please?
It was a while ago. From memory, it was a straight sync deal, so I think we just did the deal directly with the publisher and the label.
Okay.
And I remember they were independent, so I can't remember which ones. She, as an artist, is Australian.
She is Aussie, yeah.
And I remember that it took a while to track down who her UK rights owners were.
Really? What, she didn't know?
Well, no, it's not that she didn't know. It's because quite often with independent artists signed overseas, sometimes their label and publisher will have a UK licensee, and sometimes they won't.
Right.
And
like a sub-publisher, or?
Well, it's, for example, if, for example, an artist is signed in the States to a small independent record label,
yeah,
that record label may be partnered. They may have their own UK office.
Yeah.
They may be partnered with a UK licensee, or you may have to deal directly with that label in America.
Yeah, I think you mentioned in your book, you mentioned that the example of Taylor Swift, who is assigned to the record label Big Machine, which is an indie, but they also have a big deal with Universal, which obviously is a major
Taylor Swift's obviously a completely different category of artist, but quite often with kind of small independent artists, it takes a bit of research to establish exactly whether or not you can do a deal directly with their label in another territory.
I thought that's a bit mind-blowing. I mean, wouldn't that be the task of a manager of Courtney Barnett to know these things?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, but again, sometimes it's not always immediately apparent who the manager is, or if so, how you can track them down.
Right.
It depends. Sometimes you can just simply Google the artist name, manager, find the website, all the contact details, get them on the phone. But quite often, it's not that straightforward, and there's quite a lot of cross-referencing needs to be done against Wikipedia, against the artist's Facebook page, to establish precisely who represents them, and then, whether or not you can get hold of their contact details. It depends.
So how did this come about in the case of Hunter and Courtney Barnett? You got a call from Hunter and said, we're really excited about artists, we would want to use her music. Hunter
selected the tracks. I think they worked with a separate creative music supervisor who made the creative suggestion, and then they advised us which tracks they wanted to use, and then we started looking into them. From memory on that project, there were one or two that were signed to majors that the quotes we received back were far in excess of the budget that was available. So those tracks were set aside as being too expensive. Courtney Barnett, memory ended up being more than they wanted to pay, but it worked within the available budget.
Definitely, because Hunter is the sort of boots that you would wear to go to festivals like Glastonbury and Reading, etc. And Courtney Barnett is definitely the kind of artist that you would find on this festival circuit. So I think that the link between Courtney Barnett, what she represents, what she embodies also as a young female artist, brand Hunter, there are lots of synergies. So I think it was a lovely project. And so you said it was a straightforward sync deal. Was that for a master license as well as a sync license, both for the publishing and the...
Yes.
Obviously, because you used sound recording, obviously.
Yeah, by straight sync deal, there was no involvement of the artist in terms of live performance. So that's when I say straight sync deal,
I get it.
It's simply licensing the song and the recording.
Right.
And again, it's interesting the point you just made, because again, the way I use the word sync is I think about a sync right in the song and a sync right in the recording. In the US, interestingly, they often talk about sync and master, meaning in their terminology, sync purely relates to the song, the publishing right.
Yeah.
And the master license is then in respect of the recording. However, when that master license comes through, it may well say synchronization license on the top of the document, and it's usually issued by the sync team of the record label. So I tend to think of sync as being an all-encompassing term, within which is publishing for the song and master for the recording.
Understood.
But that's just my take on it.
Yeah. Well, then it's just a matter of reading what the content of a master sync license is, and then you can see whether it relates to the song or to a sound recording.
Well, a master sync license is only going to relate to the recording.
Oh, sorry, so the sync license, yeah. So how did Hunter use that piece of music on which they had all the licensed all the rights? Did they use it for the catwalk show, or did they put it in an ad?
No, it was licensed for the show.
For the show?
Yeah.
Okay. So basically, fashion brands, whenever they do their catwalk shows, they have to clear all the rights for all the songs which are going to be played on the catwalk.
It's an interesting question. Before shows were made available as live streams or video on demand, all they needed were public performance licenses for the venue. So in the UK, those would be PRS and PPL licenses.
Right.
If the repertoire that they were playing were by songwriters that were PRS members or PRS affiliates, and if the recordings were record labels that were PPL members or affiliates. Of course, over the last at least 5 years, a lot of fashion brands now live stream their events or make them available on demand. So that requires sync licenses. So those songs and recordings have to be pre-cleared, title by title, with a negotiated fee, in order that they can be used within the show that's made available to the public, effectively outside of the room.
Yeah.
And that's been an interesting and that's been an interesting change in the last few years.
Sure, well, it's good. More money for you, and hopefully more money for lawyers as well.
Well, indeed, and more money for the rights owners. But then it depends on the stature of the track and the brand and the usage rights.
Thank you for giving us so much information about this particular example, and well done for doing something with Courtney Barnett, because I really think she's got a bright future ahead of her. Yeah, I wanted to come back on your background. Yesterday I browsed on your LinkedIn profile. I hope you don't mind.
No,
and I saw that you started as a clarinetist at Guildhall, right? That's fantastic.
Yes. So I did a music degree at City University a long time ago.
Okay.
And within that degree was the opportunity to study a lead instrument at Guildhall. So my classical instrument, not that I play it anymore, was clarinet, and I did all my grades rather than the piano. I wish actually I'd done it on the piano instead, but I didn't. And so for 2 years I had clarinet lessons with a great teacher called Anton Weinberg.
Well, great. You emulated both Woody Allen and my brother. My brother has played clarinet for 12, 13 years. And
I wasn't a great clarinetist.
Okay, he was almost
not well.
To become a concertist, or
no, I knew I was never good enough to do it as a soloist, and to be honest, I didn't want to. I did after university play clarinet in called Miro for quite a few years, and we made a few albums and we did several tours in Italy, and it was great fun. I never made any money doing it, but I had a great laugh.
So you basically moved from the creative side, which probably when you were a kid was a sort of hobby, sort of extracurricular activity, and then you graduated in that, and then you moved away from the purely creative side to more music business focused approach. And I think that then you moved on to music composition and also working for a music production company, and even setting up a music production company.
So I set up a music production company to write music for ads and TV for a couple of years.
Right.
Which gave me the first sort of exposure to ad agencies. So I spent...
What was it called, this one?
It's called Nim Nim.
Right, yeah.
Nim Music.
Yeah.
So within that, I was both, writing, but also together with my business partner at the time, knocking on a lot of doors in Soho, trying to get in the front door a lot of ad agencies who were very difficult to get to see.
Right.
I remember on many, many occasions we'd arrange meetings, turn up to see people, they weren't there.
Yeah.
That was very common.
Well, hey, I know it was a long time ago, but that's a perfect way to, prepare the background and to build and forge those relationships quite early in the days.
Yes.
And you can reap on this relationship, but it takes a lot of time, always.
It was an interesting learning experience in terms of how ad agencies dealt with composers and music production companies, and certainly just kind of understanding at the time who the main ad agencies in London were, what the structure was in terms of the teams within them. So at a very basic level, account management, TV production and creative.
Well, understanding how they were structured inside?
Yeah, exactly.
So which were the big players at the time in the ad business?
Well, the ones,
Saatchi and Saatchi.
yeah, I mean the big network agencies that are still around now. So Saatchi and Saatchi, McCann Erickson, Ogilvy and Mather, JWT, Gray. I mean,
yeah, no change there.
All the big networks, and there were some of the independents that have since come and gone. It was my kind of first exploration into the way ad agencies worked, and it was through doing that I managed to get into Zomba and the world of music publishing.
I was about to say, and then you kind of took yourself outside this music production company business and music composition business, and you delved into publishing for quite a few years. And I was reading on your LinkedIn profile that Zomba apparently was one of the largest independent publishers.
It was the largest independent.
Before it got acquired by BMG,
exactly.
Which now is the largest, like the mini major, as they call it, BMG.
And the fact that I just read an interesting interview with head of the UK business
of BMG?
Of BMG, and she describes BMG as being kind of neither an independent nor a major, but a sort of
She's got the
third way. And I would agree.
So what did this teach you? What did you learn when you were at Zomba in this publishing capacity? You were head of TV, film and media, by the way, so you were still doing syncs.
Absolutely, yeah. So
a bit like Tom Foster is doing at UMPG, University of Music Publishing.
I mean, Tom's in charge of a far bigger department. When I started, I was the whole film TV department. There was no one else.
That's nice feeling.
When I arrived, sync wasn't anything like as established then as it is now. It was seen as...
What years are we talking about? Sorry.
I joined Zomba in March 94.
Right here, so the 90s.
Yeah, okay. So mid-90s. Zomba's label Jive had a huge amount of success with a lot of US rap artists and then moving into R&B. So a few years before, they'd had a massive hit in the UK with Boom Shake the Room by DJ Jazzy Jeff and the Fresh Prince. They'd started having a lot of success with R. Kelly. In the UK on Silvertone, they'd had a huge hit with the Stone Roses, although then a very acrimonious lawsuit with them as well.
That's not a rap band.
No, Stone Roses was sort of British sort of indie act from the sort of Mad Chester scene, as it was called. They also had a huge amount of success in publishing with a very famous rock writer-producer called Mutt Langer. They published Iron Maiden and Def Leppard, and in the UK, Bruce Springsteen as well.
Yeah, definitely a big indie publisher.
So in terms of the learnings, I mean, it was an incredibly commercially driven organisation. It was all about the bottom line. They didn't care about chart positions or market share.
Wow.
Or awards or any of that. It was just about profit.
Okay.
So it was quite a tough environment in which to grow up in, but I learned a huge amount. And to be honest, I didn't really know a great deal about publishing when I started, but I had to learn very fast. I remember
did you have some targets that you had to meet and stuff, like a salesperson?
Not really, because they didn't really know. I mean, as time went on, yes, I kind of set my own targets. But when I started, I can remember within the first week kind of, I think in fact on the first day, being shown my office, and in these days, everyone had their own office, and
how nice.
I mean, the great thing about that time, and it's so you'd arrive. First thing happened on the first day, you get your company car. Everyone had a company car.
A company car, company card,
vehicle. Well,
it was all about the bottom line, but they were not difficult about the cost as well.
Everyone got cars and their own office and a huge hi-fi. That's what happened then. But I remember, talking to my boss and going, right then, okay, well, what do you want me to do? And he opened up this huge cupboard with masses and masses of records, and we're talking vinyl. And then said, there's the catalogue, figure out what's in there and go and sell it. And that was it. So
lovely.
The initial...
that's a brief.
Yeah, I mean, the initial few weeks and months were spent just actually figuring out what they had. Okay. No one had, other than the copyright database.
So are you saying that they didn't have any database on the computer?
They had a copyright. The copyright department had a database of all the titles. Okay. But no one had kind of catalogued it in such a way that was useful for sync.
So you had to physically go for all the vinyls.
Figuring out, right, what have we got in rock? What have we got in rap? What have we got in pop? And then start looking at who are the artists that might actually be suitable for sync.
Well, you were really good.
Over time, I had to kind of figure that out, and I did have quite a lot of contact with my colleagues in the States who were already far more advanced on this than I was. So there was a big office in LA who were very sync focused. So after a few years, I went across to see them. There were people in New York who did licensing. So any licensing that I did of US repertoire, I had to talk to the people in New York, and likewise they had to talk to me for UK repertoire. So gradually I got a better understanding of kind of how it worked. I learned a huge amount from the in-house lawyers, both of whom are still around. So there's Mark...
What, at BMG?
No, at Zomba.
Zomba still exists?
Well, no, Zomba doesn't exist anymore, but at the time, so the lawyer who was there initially, head lawyer, is a guy called Mark Furman, who is now, as far as I know, at Parlophone.
Okay.
And subsequently Michael Smith, who's now, the most senior legal person at Sony Music.
Okay.
Both of these.
So they've moved around, they're still in the business?
Michael went from to BMG to Sony, BMG to Sony.
Well, in a way, you were really lucky that you had the Los Angeles office, knowledge you could leverage in order to basically not to have to reinvent the wheel. Was that Los Angeles office mainly working for on syncs for feature films, or was it also doing some business on the ad business? On the ad side?
LA office was almost entirely working on film and TV.
TV as well.
Dealing with the Hollywood studios.
Right.
Where there was opportunity to play songs into ads, that tended to be dealt with by New York, initially just on a reactive basis.
Right.
But subsequently they hired someone to deal with it on a proactive basis.
Mm-hmm. So the ad was done out of New York?
Yeah. I mean, it's still...
Feature films and TV was done out of Los Angeles, and you were doing what you could, and both sides out of London to cater for the needs of a European market.
Yes.
Yeah. It hasn't changed that much, really.
No. In America, generally my understanding is still, if you want to work in the ad business, it's mostly New York or Chicago.
Okay.
Because Leo Burnett is headquartered in Chicago. There are some agencies in LA. Whereas the film and TV industry is obviously very much centred in LA.
Los Angeles, that's right. I'm currently working with a music composer who's based out of London, and he wants to move away from, I already mentioned him to you, move away from music production for ads and more into feature films. Yeah. And he's a mercenary, if a job is offered to him to go to LA, he'll go.
Yeah,
he'll take his bags and his wife and he'll just go. And frankly, I think it's a great attitude, because if you really want to, you have to be serious about what your priorities are. And feature films is still very much LA focused.
And having just come back from New York and going back there again, there is a great benefit of being physically present.
Yeah,
people need to see you. You need to be seen.
Even your agent, I'm talking about him.
Yeah, but you need to be physically there. It's if you're
true.
Out of sight, you're out of mind. So they need to know that you are there in their time zone, available to them.
Because Los Angeles is wonderful, so why not? So after the great experience, very formative years at Zumba, the publisher, you decided to create that joint venture with BBH, which is one of the main contenders in the ad business, I understand, the likes of McCann, Erickson, and WPP. So BBH and you set up that joint venture, which is Lip Music, which is, as you describe on your LinkedIn profile, the first music publishing company inside a UK ad agency, and created, I quote, significant waves in publishing community at the time. What do you mean by that?
Historically in the UK...
Thank you.
No. Well, I'll kind of explain how it came about. So at Zomba, we had quite a number of publishing admin deals with broadcasters and TV production companies. So, for example, Channel 4. And prior to the consolidation of all of the ITV franchises, there were separate companies in each region. These days, it's all just ITV. But going back to the 90s, there were probably a dozen or so different companies, and Zomba had admin deals with HTV in Wales, Border TV up in the northwest, and Channel TV in the Channel Islands.
What do you mean? Sorry, what do you mean by admin deals?
Okay, so admin deals meant that where these companies were commissioning bespoke music, typically for news themes or promos, or sometimes for kind of editorial programming, we would provide those companies with the contracts in order that they could acquire the copyright in those bespoke scores, and Zomba would then administer them.
So an assignment of 100% of the copyright in the song?
Yes.
So maybe we got publisher per se.
Yeah, so they became the original publisher, but they weren't in the publishing business, so they didn't know how to do registrations and royalty collection. Right. And that's what Zomba would do.
As an administrator.
As an administrator. Okay. The composer would still get the 50% share of PRS royalties directly. Yeah. And 50% share of any ancillary mechanical or sync income. But we would collect 50% of the performance income, the publisher share, take a commission and pass it back to the client.
A bit like a sub-publisher in a foreign country.
Exactly. And I wondered, why was no one doing this in advertising? I knew
in-house.
in the UK, and I knew I had a sense that in America this was already happening, but in the UK it wasn't. And this thought was sparked by meeting someone who at the time was working for P&G and told me about how the system works in the US, and we debated why wasn't anyone doing it here. So because I'd been meeting quite a lot of heads of TV or heads of TV production of various ad agencies, I started kind of floating this idea, and I had a very positive reception from a few, particularly Francis Royal, who was the head of production at BBH, and BBH had quite a long history of involvement in music, particularly in relation to the Levi's brand. So there were a lot of hit records that had come off the back of Levi's ads.
I remember there's ads from Levi's in the mid-noughties and beginning of the
in the
90s, they were cool. I remember.
And so every
On
music
TV.
company was knocking on their door wanting to do business with them. Over a 2-year period, I kind of worked out how to kind of put together a joint venture kind of music publishing company with BBH, which we then launched in April 2003.
So the idea was to ensure that BBH would get 100% of the copyright on the song in the projects the TV projects they were involved in, the ad project they were involved in, and then you, for your joint venture in Leap Music, you would basically do the administration of this?
Slightly different to that. So for projects where the creative need was a bespoke score, as opposed to an existing licensed track, for those projects, BBH would commission the composer, normally within which there would be a limited sync license, but then separate to that, the composer would assign the copyright in the composition to Leap. So Leap became the publisher.
Okay.
Initially, we had a global administration deal with a sub-publisher, and then after a period of time, we took the UK out of that and self-administered for the UK.
You did. Interesting.
Yeah, which, as it turned out, became more of a headache than was worthwhile.
It's a lot of time to allocate on collection of rights. Yeah. And were you doing this? Only for BBH, or do you have some other clients?
Direct acquisition of copyright was almost entirely for BBH. We did subsequently do an admin deal with Vodafone, where they became the publisher of the scores that they commissioned, and Leap administered those. And then we also did a huge amount of sync deals, again mostly on behalf of BBH, but we did do it a little bit with a few other agencies as well.
That's interesting what you are mentioning about Vodafone, because that was one of my follow-up questions. When I went to the Sync Summit in London last year, you were there actually as a speaker. I remember you kindly invited me actually, organised by Mike Fraser.
There was Sync Summit.
Sync Summit in London in April 2015.
Oh, that one. Yes, sorry, I was thinking of the London Sync sessions. Yes, you're right.
Yeah,
you're right.
And on the day where you're not there, there was one of the speakers was the Sync EP for Coca-Cola, and Tom Foster from Universal Publishing mentioned that he didn't really like the approach of Coca-Cola because they insist on having an assignment of 100% of the rights on all the songs that they are going to use. That's basically not a temporary license, that's a permanent assignment of rights. So obviously the publisher is cut out, and the brand becomes the new publisher of the or becomes the sole publisher of this.
Is that not the case though with newly commissioned songs? So I think my understanding of the way they work is that they might approach an artist/songwriter as opposed to a jobbing composer, and in their capacity of songwriter, they might typically have an exclusive publishing deal.
Yeah.
But then the brand insists that if that songwriter is going to get the gig to write for Coca-Cola, they have to persuade their publisher to give up the publishing in that song and give it to Coke instead.
Yeah. So then the songwriter has to get a waiver from the publisher, and the same if some recording is going to be used, also waiver from his or her label. Yes, that's right. But my point was, so Coca-Cola is not the only big brand doing this. Apparently Vodafone as well insists on an assignment of 100% of the rights. And do you know some other when we were working, FTSE 500 companies who are Dow Jones, like the biggest large cap in the world, which are requiring that they get an assignment of 100% of the rights?
I think you've got to distinguish between whether you're dealing with bespoke instrumental scores by composers for whom many are used to that assignment model, as opposed to the creation of new songs by songwriters who are known to the public as artists, who already have exclusive publishing agreements. And they're two very different situations. So when we were working with Vodafone, the original scores that they acquired, that we helped them acquire, were original scores by composers writing music to order for an audiovisual brief. Now that's quite different from commissioning an artist to write a song where that artist is known first and foremost as being a songwriter, where they already have an exclusive publishing deal. So I think they're two different situations.
Okay.
In America, it's quite common, and certainly in the case of bespoke scores, it's been common for many, many years, because in America there is the concept of work for hire, which doesn't really exist in the UK in the same way, not quite in the same way, or it's certainly not accepted in the same way. Also within the UK, there's a very long-standing way of working between music production companies and advertising agencies, whereby music production companies represented by a trade body called PCAM have a standard template with IPA member advertising agencies that provides for the supplier, so the music production company, retaining the copyright in the composition that's been assigned to them by the composer and licensing it to the ad agency. And to go back to your question about why Leap created a lot of waves at the time it was set up, ECAM were a very vocal opponent of what Leap was doing. Right. Because they felt threatened by it.
Because you were requiring for 100% of the assignment.
Because we were saying that we, Leap, as a subsidiary of the agency, will acquire the copyright in that bespoke score rather than the supplier retain the copyright. And then secondly, a number of the larger kind of pop rock music publishers were very upset about the thought of advertising agencies getting into the music publishing business. So at the time there was a lot of very vocal opposition to it, and I can remember a lot of people saying to me, "You won't last 6 months." And
how long did you last?
I was there for 7 years.
Well done, Richard, well done. And so more recently you launched Resilient Music, but we've already explained what you're doing in that context. So how's your book doing? Have you sold a lot of copies? Are you happy with it?
I've sold a few hundred. I've probably sold a few hundred. But the purpose of the book ultimately was not as a retail project. You know, it's a very niche title. It was never going to be something that was going to be on the shelves of W.H. Smith.
I think it's a good reference, opus, if one is interested in this music procurement business and how to go about it. Of course, it's, I'd say, for people who are beginners, but it's a very good introduction to the ins and outs of this type of business.
I mean, where it's been useful, it's been great as a sort of conversation starter with prospects that I visit. So, having just done this trip to New York, every single meeting I would begin the meeting by pulling out a copy of the book and putting it on the table.
That's great.
And that's quite an effective strategy to begin a meeting and as a result of doing that, I mean, I've just been invited back to go and speak to or present to the ANA, which is the Association of National Advertisers. It's the US equivalent of ISBA, which is the trade body for brands. So I'm presenting to their members on 2nd of November in New York. Yeah. I've also used it in an educational context. In that
I saw that you...
Yeah, so I've been invited to speak
lectured at Cambridge.
So quite a few universities.
It's perfect for students because that's open level.
I hope so.
Yeah.
And quite a number of colleges that have music business management courses. So ACM, where my son attends, Kinghamshire, Hertfordshire, UEL. I've recently been approached by Bath, University of Bath, to speak to the marketing students. So that's been quite interesting. And then I also use it in running training sessions for brands and agencies.
Yeah, I think that's maybe where the more commercial use of your book comes. It's very encouraging what I'm hearing from you, that this book is, obviously it wasn't a retail project, but it's a great business development tool.
Absolutely.
Because we at the International Association of Lawyers of the Creative Industries, YALC, that I preside and I founded back in 2013. We are writing a book on fashion and luxury brands in the digital era, and my God, it's so time consuming, and also it creates a lot of conflicts between, a lot of pointing the fingers between who's done that and who has not done that yet, etc., etc. So it's quite a tough process to write a book, as we can now assess all firsthand. And so it's good to hear that when you've put so much, blood and sweat and efforts and energy into this, you can reap the benefits afterwards when it's published, and you can use it as a very efficient business development tool. So thanks for that.
Yeah, I would say the things that made it, what helped me do it is I met a great coach called Lucy McCaraher.
Okay.
And I attended one of her courses, and she has quite a sort of strict discipline system that business-to-business authors should work to. The guidance was that a typical business book should be around about 30,000 words.
Okay.
And that if you are truly disciplined, you will write the first draft in a month by committing to getting up, an hour or two earlier every day and writing 1,000 or 1,500 words every day. And that's the only way you get it done. If you try and fit it around the rest of your schedule, you'll never get it done. So
that's what I'm going to say to my fellow colleagues at YALC. I'm sure they're going to love it.
Yeah, so the book...
Just wake up at 5 in the morning to write your 2,000 words a day.
The first draft was written in a month. The time-consuming bit is all the editing, because it goes through several stages of being proofread by what are called B readers, and you pick your B readers from different disciplines. So I had... members of my own team read it from a kind of legal and paralegal perspective. I had
to get some constructive feedback.
I had market procurement people read it, marketers read it, a bunch of different people, and then you take all their feedback and you figure out, in a lot of cases, there's lots of corrections to do. In some cases, there's lots of stuff that you delete. In other cases, there's issues that you need to elaborate on. Mm-hmm. I got a lot of advice about. The advice was very frank and in some cases quite brutal, but very good. So I would give people hard copies and they would, scribble on it, and there'd be lots of comments, boring, tedious, repetition, fix this, this doesn't make sense, but that's good.
No big ego allowed. Yeah. But hey, that's how you grow.
Yeah, and then you have to go, great, okay, good, fine. So I thought this made sense, but clearly it doesn't. I've got to figure out how to explain it in a more simple way. I can remember other people saying, oh, you're giving too much away here. And there were sections where I had previously kind of spelt things out step by step, and in the final edition it's been replaced by, this stuff's very complex, if you want to learn more about this you need to hire an expert consultant, or words to that effect.
Come to me.
And here's my phone number. Well, not quite, but,
no, in any case, well done. It's entertaining and to the point, and I really like the little anecdotes.
I hope so. I mean,
it is.
It's quite an opaque area, and I've tried to explain it in such a way that hopefully people understand it.
It's complex. I mean, out of all the creative industries that I advise, I've got clients in the luxury fashion sector, but also design, art, music, films. I must say music law is probably the most complex I have encountered, and I love it because it's so complex and sophisticated. I think the reason being that there are so many channels of revenues that cover money that you collect for collecting societies, money that you collect as one-off payments through the sync deals, etc. So it's complex and it's fascinating, but it's not easy access.
It's not always just legal. I mean, a lot of it is just about ways of working and knowing how things are done, and also kind of understanding the way that certain rights owners behave, because they don't all behave in the same way.
I am Annabelle Gauberti, and this is Lawfully Creative from Crefervi Studios.